Canada is unearthing its brutal history, a history where thousands of children were put forcibly in Catholic residential schools. They were torn away from their families, put in crowded boarding schools and subjected to sexual, physical and emotional abuse. By the end of it, thousands of children went missing. What was common among them? They all belonged to Canada's Indigenous communities. They were natives. And they all most likely died in school. We say this because the remains of these children have now been found. Canada is digging up unmarked graves, graves of children who died in the schools they were forced to attend. A few weeks ago, we reported this story from British Columbia, 215 children found in unmarked graves in a school. Now, a second mass grave has been found at another school site. What you see on your screen are pictures from Saskatchewan. A total of 751 unmarked graves have been found here. This is one of the largest burial sites found till date. Yet another reminder of the cultural genocide against the Indigenous community, the native people of Canada, a genocide that Canada chooses to forget. Let me tell you about the victims. In Canada, 3 communities make up the Indigenous population: the First Nations, the Métis, and the Inuit peoples. They are the original inhabitants of Canada, and they were targeted in the 19th and 20th centuries. They were victims of a forced assimilation campaign, something like what China is doing right now in Xinjiang, forcing people to conform to a certain culture, religion, ideology, and politics. In Canada, the government funded more than 130 compulsory boarding schools. They were opened in 1883. And they ran until the year 1996, as recently as that, 1996. 70% of these schools were run by the Roman Catholic Church. The Canadian government wanted to, quote-unquote, assimilate Indigenous children into the Western culture. What it did instead was exploit them. For decades, these children were taken from their families, often by force, and put in these boarding schools. These schools were poorly built, poorly heated. These were unsanitary facilities, infested with abusive authorities. The children suffered sexual and physical abuse. They were barred from speaking their own language. Some children managed to escape the torture, but many others were not so lucky. In the year 2008, Canada established a National Truth and Reconciliation Commission, a body to investigate these residential schools. The commission found that 4,100 children went missing from these schools across the country. The Indigenous community believes the number is much higher. One estimate says 6,000 children could have died while attending these schools. And now, as more graves emerge, the picture appears far more grim. The judge who led this commission now says that the number of victims could go well beyond 10,000. The same investigation also found the Roman Catholic Church responsible for these heinous crimes. The commission urged the Pope to apologize. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made a personal appeal, but the Roman Catholic Church has categorically rejected all of these demands. So far, the Pope has only expressed sorrow for what happened to these children. The response is unfortunate, but hardly surprising. When has the Church apologized or admitted guilt? It is mired in the biggest sexual abuse scandals in the world. For years, the Catholic Church has dealt with complaints of sexual abuse by bishops. What does it do? The Church needs to admit its role in the cultural genocide and forced conversion of people all over the world. But the Indigenous communities of Canada are not holding their breath for that to happen. Instead, they've launched a nationwide search for mass graves. Local leaders are referring back to the stories they heard from their elders. And on the basis of these accounts, they're deploying ground-penetrating radars in areas where these schools used to be. And this is how the graves in Saskatchewan were discovered.
Over the past years, the oral stories of our elders, of our survivors, and friends of our survivors have told us stories that knew these burials were here. In 1960, there may have been marks on these graves. The Catholic Church representatives removed these headstones, and today they are unmarked graves.
80-year-old Florence Sparvier went to the same boarding school. Earlier today, she shared that Indigenous people were labelled heathens by members of the Catholic Church, and the nuns told the children that they did not have souls.
I'm 80 years old, and I went to boarding school down there. I was taken by my parents to go. At that time, if the parents didn't want to allow their children to go to boarding school, one of them had to go to jail. So in order that we keep the family together, we went to boarding school. They brought us there, we stayed there. And we learned, they pounded it into us, and really they were very mean. When I say pounding, I mean pounding. They made us believe we didn't have souls.
They made us believe we did not have souls. It's such a tragic story. These schools were not imparting education, they were systematically destroying a community. Indoctrination, exploitation, physical and mental abuse, all of these are hallmarks of a genocide. These Catholic schools in Canada committed these grave crimes, but the Catholic Church does not admit it was a genocide. Well, neither does Canada. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau projects his country as the vanguard of democratic values, but Canada is yet to acknowledge this genocide against its own people. Officially, Canada recognizes 8 genocides the world over: the Holocaust during the Second World War, the Armenian genocide of 1915, the Ukrainian famine genocide of 1923, the Rwandan genocide of 1994, the Srebrenica massacres in 1995, the mass killing of the Yazidi people in 2014, the Rohingya genocide in 2016, and the ongoing genocide of the Uyghurs in China. Canada has recognized all these events as genocide. What about the mass murder of children at home? That, for Canada, does not qualify as genocide. In fact, Canada has largely forgotten about it, or had forgotten, until the mass graves could no longer be ignored. And now more are being discovered, so Canada is being forced to face up to one of the darkest chapters in its history. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.